Hello, my name is Lucas Robinson, and today I will be talking to you about a book I read called The Age of Sustainable Development by Jeffrey D. Sachs. Now, in this book, Sachs speaks on many different topics to do with our fast-paced developing world, some of which include the development of new countries, climate change, social standards, and sustainable development. Sachs' main idea in the book is on the difficulty of sustainable development and how society should go about achieving it. What Sachs doesn't discuss in this book that I think is important is the new forms of technology and what it will mean if they are sustainable, the factors that broad-based social inclusion will have on the economy or the environment, and how agriculture and aquaculture will develop alongside with sustainable technology. But first, we must define, what is sustainable development? Well, according to Sachs, sustainable development is the greatest and most complicated challenge that humanity has ever faced. He also says that to achieve sustainable development, a country must achieve three simultaneous goals. These goals are economic growth, environmental sustainability, and broad-based social inclusion. So, Sachs doesn't discuss what the new forms of technology will be and what it will mean if they are sustainable. So in the past, when a new form of technology is discovered, it would create a big wave of economic surplus, and this wave would eventually crash, creating a deficit for the economy. Some examples of this over the years are the invention of electrification and chemicals, which eventually, that created a big economic surplus, which eventually resulted in the recession in 1929 and the 30s known as the Great Depression. Another example, after that, the invention of automobiles and petrochemicals, which led to the first and second oil crisis in the 70s. The last deficit we experienced was the crash of 2008. This happened in the era of informational technology. The one thing to realize is that in each era of new technology, resources are always changing. And Sachs does not discuss how new countries, new developing nations, will be able to take advantage of this. So if they are sustainable, instead of oil from Saudi Arabia, new resources might involve wind power from Somalia or solar power from Niger and other landlocked countries with inability to trade. So for the first time in human existence, if this is a sustainable technology, catch-up growth is something to be encouraged by more developed nations. One reoccurring trend with new technologies is that each wave of new technology is becoming more user-friendly than the last for the average consumer. I'll give you an example. I look at my phone and I see that I have a text message. I know who it's from, when it was sent, and how to reply. I don't know exactly how it goes up to a cell phone tower, then up into space, and that data gets transmitted back to the other person's phone and they receive the information I sent them. But I don't need to be able to communicate with them. This is the same case when it comes to a farmer from Niger when he has to use his solar panels. He doesn't necessarily need to know exactly how they work in order to operate them and benefit from their resources. The second thing that Sachs doesn't discuss is what factors broad-based social inclusion will have on the world economy and the environment. Sachs fails to discuss the implications of a third of the global population suddenly gaining purchasing power. This is especially true with the women in developing nations. As I said previously, the population of developing nations account for about 1/3 of the global population. I believe it's safe to assume that roughly half of this population is female. So, this means that the global economy is operating with approximately, or without approximately 15% of its global workforce, which is not only bad from a social standpoint, to say that women should have the same opportunities in education as men do, but also from an economical one. However, Before these men and women in developing nations gain purchasing power, technology needs to be sustainable so that the current trend of consumerism, which creates man-made climate change, will end. Sachs also doesn't discuss how education will soon lead to endogenous growth in these countries, not just catch-up growth. Education has recently become a basic human right, and female education in developing nations is rising rapidly. Typically, when a female is better educated, she has less children, which solves the issue of overpopulation, and she's also able to provide for these children better, making them less likely to grow up impoverished. Sachs does not discuss how these children in developing nations, once they develop a proper educational system and structure, they will begin to start inventions of their own and creating more sustainable technology that might further help to develop their country. The third thing that Sachs doesn't address is how agriculture and aquaculture should improve or how they should develop along with sustainable technology. He does mention that agriculture is the leading cause of man-made climate change. While urban landscapes, rural households, and businesses account for about 6% of total global landmass, agriculture constitutes for about 40% of that total global landmass. He also mentions that 40% of food is actually wasted before it gets to the table. This is due to either rotting, pests, or damage during transportation. This does not include the food that is thrown away by consumers once they receive the product. Another problem that Sachs addresses is the nitrogen that farmers spray into their soil. Now, whether this nitrogen is green-based or not, it runs off into lakes and creates algae blooms. I myself am a commercial fisherman and have seen algae blooms many times. It's not uncommon for me to pull into a bay and see it flooded with green with multiple fish floating in the water. This not only hurts the biodiversity of the lake itself, but also of the animals surrounding it that live off that portion of the lake. Consumers typically want the top predator when it comes to fish in a lake or ocean. This seriously affects the ecosystem of that area because when you take out when the top predator's numbers dwindle, the fish in the middle of the food chain really take it out on the bottom half, and that can cause the ecosystem to collapse. People also don't take into account the amount of other fish that are thrown away every day simply because of lack of market demand for them. People have tried to combat this by the use of fish farming. Fish farming is a decent solution to providing the population with fish. However, if these fish do escape into a lake or ocean, they could carry diseases with them and affect the local population. Sachs does mention one case where technology is used to make agriculture more sustainable. This is the Millennium Villages in Africa. Here, the UN worked with African farmers in various agroecological zones to educate them on how to grow each crop sustainably. The UN also educated pastoralists on how best to manage their livestock in the face of repeated droughts. This will be necessary here as well and all over the world if man-made climate change continues. My recommendations for how sustainable technology should develop along with agriculture and aquaculture is to concentrate on things such as crop per drop production and soil mapping. This is what the UN used in the Millennium Villages. Crop per drop production is the concentration on how much water is necessary to grow a specific plant in that region. Soil mapping looks at which crops would grow best in that region. We should implement these solutions not just on a commercial level, but for everyday citizens as well, educating them on how much water they need to grow a specific plant and where their plants would grow best. Scientists should also concentrate on the development of GMOs, creating organisms that can grow with less water and in more hostile conditions. Lastly, I'd just like to say that the people that will be the most affected by climate change haven't been born yet. And without every country committed, no country is actually on the path to sustainable development. Even if that country takes part in sustainable practices, it is still affected by the negative externalities of other countries that don't. Thank you.